Welcome, everyone. Looks like I'm going to start today with a little bit of a reaction to a relatively new video called Diablo 4 Just Go Play Path of Exile. Aptly named, I suppose. Right after the Season 1 patch notes of Mega Nerfs came out, I haven't really commented on that. I was already not planning to do Season 1, so it's not like they diminished my motivation to play the season. I already wasn't going to, but I will say a lot of people in my own community went from being, marginally excited to maybe moderately, maybe very excited, and, knocked down a peg or two in that excitement from this. So, brilliantly timed video. It's going to be linked in the description. So you can just watch it directly there if you would rather see it that way. It's just 14 minutes long, so I'm very curious about this video as a Path of Exile player. It looks like it's designed for Diablo 4 players. I'm going to talk about the wonders and, everything that is so great about Path of Exile, or maybe how it's better than Diablo 4, I guess. I'm curious to see what type of audience is really oriented toward, if he's trying to reach out to the casual audience, or if it's kind of more satirical. I just watched a couple minutes of it to make sure it's not, a bad video. It does seem to be pretty good. So, yeah, curious. I'm going to go ahead and react to it here.
Alright, the title is pretty accurate, and I'm definitely about to clown on Diablo 4 kind of a lot, but that being said, people can enjoy and play whatever they want to. It's not a bad...
Well, I guess we already got a question. Aren't you tired of this D4 to PoE compares all the time? No, not really. I will say I'll probably not be the least bit interested in it once the PoE next league comes out, though, because then I'll have bigger fish to fry. But for now, we're in the major lull of the down season, so yeah, that's kind of at the forefront of what people are doing and talking about right now.
Bad game, strictly speaking. There are good parts, I'll try to also make sure to mention those, but every time I play Diablo 4, I catch myself thinking more than once every single session, why is it like this, and why don't I just go play Path of Exile? For starters, this is a $70 game with microtransactions. I want everyone to remember that as I go deeper into the review, because that matters. $70 with expensive microtransactions. Cool, fun, maybe you don't care, but why don't I just play Path of Exile then? Unlike Diablo 4, it's free, and with $70 I can buy...
For the record, the $70 price tag didn't really bother me. I've spent a few $100s on Path of Exile at this point, so, I mean, I've definitely spent a lot more money in Path of Exile than I did in Diablo 4, but, people, when it comes to just exploring the game from the start, yeah, that is a major difference. It's free to explore, whereas Diablo 4, outside of the open beta, was not free to explore the game for nothing.
Buy plenty of discounted cosmetics and utility items, of which there are more and better than Diablo 4. Great start. In the background right now, there's some footage of a rogue I started leveling, but it's not exactly where I want it to be just yet. Long way to go, of course. I really do enjoy the gameplay at times, so it's easy to get sucked in and keep playing dungeons for like one continuous session, but the reason I play games like this, really boiling it down to the absolute minimum, is to make character builds and get loot. Games like Diablo 4 are fundamentally about those two things, builds and loot. What you get for loot determines how...
Actually, I really like these, but I've had in the back of my mind a video, kind of I don't really know how I want to title it or really approach it, but in my opinion, there's basically two different types of players, core types of players, and one is either you are someone who looks at a game like an ARPG like Path of Exile or Diablo as a loot-based game, and that is kind of the means to the end. It's all about the loot, and you're like coveting all the loot. Or you're someone who is all about like the power fantasy and the actual power that you feel and beating bosses. And basically, if you're someone who really likes pinnacle bosses, probably more about the power fantasy. If you're someone who's more about grinding maps and getting loot, probably care, and having best in slot or something, probably more about the loot. I am of the latter. I really approach the game as a loot perspective, and yeah, I want to make a video about that at some point, but yeah, really cool to hear him kind of already allude to that.
How you can build, and how you build determines how fast and how much you can get for loot, and if you can ascend through the difficulties and continue to get the better loot. It's a binary cycle.
I suppose if you're
Diablo 4
if you focus heavily on the build, then it's more about the power fantasy than it is about the loot for you.
pulls it off acceptably well. Genuinely, it does. But when you look at these two systems apart from each other and then look at the ways that they interact with one another, things kind of start to unravel. Diablo 4 progression basically goes like this. What you do from level 1 to level 60 doesn't really matter. That's just leveling. 60 or 70 to like 90 or so is mid game, and after that you get towards end game. Some people have
I don't know why he says it doesn't really matter. I mean, at some point you have certain check marks you have to tick off. You got to get the altars, you got to get the, the renown and all that stuff. So you do have some things that have real stakes, and you can actually make your character permanently stronger early on, and it's a good idea to kind of tailor what you're trying to do to get that out of the way early. Although I suppose if it all carries over in seasons, then it doesn't matter anymore.
Have different definitions of early, mid, and late game. They say that mid game is really about 45 onwards to 80, but you get the point. Early, mid, late as general units, where early is just a grind fest to get something functional. Mid game is a refinement of some kind of build, and late game is grinding content to perfect rolls on gear. Early game is pretty fun. You start scavenging for gear, learning what the unique bonuses do from the different items, putting something together on the fly, maybe playing with your cosmetics, and feeling the basic curve of power progression.
Yeah, I mean, this is everybody. Literally everybody says this about Diablo 4. The early game is good. The open beta experience was a lot of fun. Most people say always was some concern for the end game, but it does appear that the highlight of this game is the early game experience. Yeah, for sure.
It's enjoyable. At least it has been for me a couple of times, but you very quickly start running into problems. See, early game is genuinely fun. The story is good, the combat is good, the progression feels nice, and that sort of, ooh, a piece of candy mentality is really fresh on your mind, so you just feel good about playing. However, as soon as you get into mid game, it throws you a curveball. For starters, you only have 4 stash tabs. This is interesting, and they will, of course, sell you stash tabs in the future, guaranteed for a price.
Wow, very cynical take on that. Yeah, the 4 stash tab thing, that sucks. I'm guessing that we're just going to get a stash tab unlock every season. I mean, that's what I would have guessed. That's what they did in Diablo 3. It won't matter. This won't be that big of a deal in the distant future, but yeah, for now it sucks. Definitely.
Price tag in a $70 game that also has microtransactions, but I catch myself thinking, why don't I just play Path of Exile? At least there I can actually keep the gear I want to. Some people might say, oh, well, you're just nitpicking here, but no, I'm not. Diablo 4 has a lot of interesting gear. That's one of the best aspects of the game. I want to collect it. That's the purpose. That's the whole point of the game, but I can't really collect it because I don't have the space to collect it. All the gems, which don't have their own tab, funnily enough, take up a large chunk of my stash capacity, and this kind of terrible loot management extends to every facet of the game. There's no search function for the stash, like there is in Path of Exile. They doubled up and keep 2 of the most critical consumable items, of which you will want to hoard many of them, by the way, over the course of your playtime, those being elixirs and sigils, in the same sub-inventory slot.
Yeah, I'm very unhappy about that. The gems, the elixirs, and the sigils, and all that stuff being a part of that, yeah. I think that's absolutely one of the most legitimate complaints about the, playing the game, the systems built into the game.
So you constantly have to play this mini game of hot potato if you actually want to maintain a hoard of loot.
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot what I was going to say a second ago. So I haven't really talked a whole lot about this, but I didn't really complain much about stash space when I was giving my critiques. And I guess that's primarily because I only played one character, and I did kind of learn to discipline myself and what aspects I kept. If you're someone who is like grinding a ton of grinding, and you're like keeping 17 different copies of the same aspect on all different roles, yeah, I don't think that's really necessary. I think only one time like ever did I run into a situation where I was like, oh, why did I remove that aspect, because that was stupid. So I always kept like the highest roll of every aspect once, at least one copy. It's usually multiple copies if I knew it was a good one. And I think only one time ever did I run out of an aspect I needed because I trashed a few like high tier roll ones. Like maybe I had a perfect one, I put it on an item, and then I suddenly had another upgrade for that same slot real quick again, and I needed it again, and I didn't have that aspect. That only happened to me like once ever. And I know that Mules was a workaround, but yeah, Mules 2023. Why are we talking about that? So I do think the stash tab's kind of an issue, but I just wanted to point out that it actually didn't bother me that much. If gems, sigils, and elixirs had their own space, personally, I would have been pretty alright with just 4 stash tabs for now.
And they don't have any sort of quick drop function, so
Am I going to play D4 Season 1? Nope. I wasn't going to play even before seeing these patch notes.
if you ever get in the thick of it for a dungeon and need to make rapid decisions about inventory or what to carry, you can't even do that quickly because you have to drag things physically around like a moron with the inventory open. Now, for build functionality, I had a lot of fun, okay? It might be surprising to hear, but I did. For a bit. For a little bit. After that, I realized something. Why was I spending time trying to find creative ways to use this skill tree right here when I could have access to this one? Once again, the question loomed in my head, why don't I just play Path of Exile? To be fair, I like the Pantheon system in Diablo 4. It's interesting, it's fun to creep across the board, and the abundance of points can make it super satisfying to unlock secondary bonuses and piece together functional damage. But wait.
You know, the paragon system in Diablo 4 is a tricky one to examine. It really does have the allure of complexity, but it just it runs into the same trap of like you can, you just look up a guide for it. Everybody's just gonna look up a guide for it and figure out which one's the best. I did actually put in the due diligence and like cross examine a couple of different guides and slight differences, and I did do a few tiny changes to the point. And we're talking about like think of the entire Paragon board, like all 6 or 7 boards. I think I managed to squeeze in like 2 extra good main stat points and remove like a couple of like willpower or intellect points, like a grand total of like 10 additional strength for having actually like gone through and like done the hard math on it myself compared to the guides. And even that was a little bit questionable because anyway, it's hard to explain. I don't want to get into details, but basically, if you're any normal person, you can just look at a guide and it's there. Whereas like the Path of Exile skill tree, yeah, there's a lot of guide there, but it's just the level of complexity and choices are just so great that even if there's like a million guides out there, there's still not necessarily the best way to make the build or do it your way. I mean, I'm 3 years into this game now, and I used Sublime Vision for the first time in a recent build. It's like, what?
No, because if you want to reset something significant way back in the tree towards actual endgame, you have to reset practically everything. Why would I play a game with less content, less convenience, less customization, and less quality of life for 10 times the price tag with less capacity to even keep the gear I find? That question was getting pretty hard for me to answer.
Well, the reason you might do all those things is because you can't be bothered to learn, all about the incredible complexity and wonder of Path of Exile. That's why you open that skill tree and you're like, freak the F out, like most normal people. Yeah.
Like I
That's
said,
the reason.
early game was fun because everything felt fresh and new, which is a completely intoxicating feeling for me as a video game player, likewise true for most other people out there. But when going through mid game into end game on my first character, the honeymoon phase ended unceremoniously. For example, there's a lot of basic components on the map organized nicely into their own little list on the side of your inventory.
Yeah, kind of. It kind of dawned on me after I was around in the mid 90s that I wasn't really having that much fun anymore. Spin to win is just very satisfying, and the combat is so satisfying. I did manage to, I guess trick myself into having fun, like all the way up to like level 95 or something. But certainly, I remember there was one day I just logged in and I was like, I'm gonna do this again. That kind of feeling.
And at first, that's cool. The UI is not great, but it's fine. So there's components, whatever, big whoop. Because you don't really do any respecking or rolling. You don't see the significance here. You don't even pay attention to them. But as soon as you start, yeah, things get expensive. And a lot of those actual material types are just completely left behind. There's no point to them. It made me wonder, why am I playing this game when Path of Exile has an orb currency system tied directly into a massive crafting function where things always maintain value and practical usage in an economy that facilitates trade and cooperation. Yeah.
Okay, fair point. The economy and the currency system of Path of Exile is absolutely one of the strongest selling points of that game. There's no way in hell I can argue against it. I mean, to play devil's advocate, the only thing I will say is that again, it's incredibly diverse. Number of different orbs and things you have to learn. It'll take a long time to really figure out what the value of everything is, and of course, you're going to have to use a lot of third-party tools to kind of examine the price points of things. I mean, you literally have to use a third-party tool to sell anything, actually. But I will say one small rebuttal. This game does a fantastic job with the gold sync. Does a better job than any other game I've seen, any other Diablo game for sure. The gold sync is fantastic in this game. You could argue that it's too punishing for reforges. Yeah, that okay maybe, but I never once felt like, even like a full week after being level 100, I felt like, you know, I grind up a decent amount of gold and then it's just all gone again, either through buying an item or, I blew like 10 reforges on an item that costs up to 6 million gold to reforge each time. that was it. So yeah, I definitely didn't like Diablo 3's gold system in the beginning, and Diablo 2, of course, is an absolute joke. But D4, I felt did a much better job with the gold sync, at least on that note.
Diablo 4 basically does not have a player economy. It's supposed to, it says it does, but it doesn't. That's fine for solo self-found fans or players, but for someone like me who loves trading with other players of the game and buying or selling in a player-driven economy of sorts.
Wow, somebody else readily admitting they love trade. Okay, well, this guy's my new best friend then, because a lot of times people make videos like this and they're kind of snarkily crap on trade or whatever. Like it's not that. Yeah, a lot of people make videos are all about the solo self-found play. I'm a big person who loves trade. If I played hardcore, I'll play trade. Hardcore solo self-found sounds like the worst game mode to me. If I was, the second worst one would be solo self-found. The third worst one would be the regular one. And actually, if the game wasn't quite so punishing, I would probably like hardcore trade as the best. I mean, that's what I enjoyed in Diablo 3, after all. And it was some of the funnest or most enjoyable ARPG experience of my life, Diablo 3 Vanilla, and it was in large part because of trade. So I'm absolutely on the same page as this guy on, where the hell's the trade in this game? My biggest complaint about it, for sure.
That sucks. Why would I play this game when it quite obviously is unfinished? I hope they make something functional to facilitate a player-driven economy, which doesn't really exist right now, but until they do, there's basically none of that. If we want to talk
yeah, just for clarification, trade does exist in this game. I even had a video how I made 55 million gold trading an amulet. It's unbelievably convoluted and restrictive, and yeah, it's just you can't trade, like you obviously can't trade any uber uniques. You can't. There's a lot of things you can't trade, and it's very restrictive. I'm not asking for an auction house, but certainly asking for a system that would facilitate, even like BattleNet would suffice here.
Talk about general player cooperation, because the game is supposed to have MMO type elements to it. It does exist in Diablo 4, it's just broken. The cooperation you find is boosting and leeching, because people can just enter an instance, have.
Oh yeah, I always forget to talk about this. The fact the item, like a lot of the items I didn't trade, I couldn't trade because they were item level requirement 100. Because if I'm level 100 and I'm farming items to level 100, and a lot of people were like much lower level than that. I guess they're fixing that. I think I hear. It's one of the dumbest things that was programmed in this game. I don't know how they let that slip, or how they came to a purposeful game design decision to make the items that drop equal the same item level. I was just either super lazy or incompetent. I complained a second ago. Trade was my biggest complaint about the game, but actually, in terms of like one specific issue in this game, probably my single greatest complaint about this game is why is level requirement the same as the item, or the same as the level you are when you find the item? Absolutely stupid.
If someone else kill the entire dungeon for them basically instantaneously and get everything immediately. I'm not saying I don't want there to be some sort of motivation for higher level players to help out lower level ones. Like, that's all well and good. Or some kind of power fantasy where you can get boosted a bit by your buddy who happens to have a badass build. But The total support of leeching and boosting is just way too far and doesn't make sense. This is like the basic framework of a game that just isn't complete yet. Maybe polished is a better word here, and that's okay because it just came out. But is it okay though? Is it really okay? It's a $70 game with microtransactions that you'll have to buy utility for, like stash tabs. Is that okay? Really? A good example of what I'm talking about is dungeon design. Basically, every dungeon is the same. Grab 2 or 3 things scattered around, or kill a set of monsters, unlock a door, go.
I, for the life of me, cannot understand how the halls of hatred, after doing Mephisto runs, seemingly for my entire life at one point, to countless, like thousands of Mephisto runs, I still didn't know exactly how to find the halls of hatred level 4 or whatever it was ASAP. You still get lost in that dungeon. It was amazing. Like their random dungeon generator in Diablo 2 was so far and above anything they have in Diablo 3 especially, or this game. For the life of me, can't understand. I mean, I think Path of Exile does a rather poor job of random generation, considering the tech for incredibly wide generations was out for Diablo 2, and that was incredible how that game was set up. You had certain zones like where the Traversals were, in Diablo 2, and they were kind of set on or whatever, but there were many zones that were very difficult to navigate, and sometimes you would, it was cool because it made you feel good about finding the door really quickly. You were forced to kind of engage with some areas that you maybe didn't really want to go, and it gave definitely gave you some of that RP feeling, like you're getting lost in this maze of where the hell to go, and that was a big part of Diablo 2. I missed that for Diablo 3, Path of Exile, and this game, as a matter of fact. I don't know, maybe people are not on the same page with me, but Path of Exile does an okay job with map generation, although there are a lot of maps that don't have hardly any variation, like Crimson Temple. But there are some maps like Cemetery that can vary a fair bit, and you can sometimes not really figure out where the boss room is on that map, or it can take a while. It can be a little bit annoying, but I don't really. I'm saying annoying as like for lack of a better word. I kind of like it, like in the immediate sense, I don't like it, but like as far as that game design, I do like that.
Kill the main boss. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Well, they split the things that you have to gather or kill or whatever it is into separate locations around the first part of the dungeon, but there's no map overlay. So you have to keep spam opening the map every couple of seconds to see where you've gone and where you have to go next.
All right. Another big complaint I'm hearing, especially from a lot of people who play Path of Exile. This is one of those rare cases where I think I'm on the Diablo fanboy side. I don't think map overlay is automatically a great thing. I think, in fact, in my opinion, the best kind of game would be designed in such a way where you don't feel like you even need a map overlay to navigate well. Like it would just, either the map is in a tiny little spot in the corner, or the game is just set up. It's hard to explain. What I'm trying to say is having a robust map overlay can never be the best case scenario, because that gets in the way of you actually like seeing what the hell you're doing when you're playing. And it's true when I'm playing Path of Exile, if I'm trying to play it the most efficient way I can, I'm not actually really looking at any monsters or any walls or anything. I'm just running around and looking at the map. I'm letting the map guide me. And it's cool, the map is there, and we can like adjust the settings on it, the opacity and the size and everything. It's nice. Players got a lot of agency in that. But I do think it definitely it's become a crutch for a lot of players. It's really not that necessary, and I think the game might actually be better off if we didn't have an overlay in Path of Exile. Like if we never had one, so you don't even know what you missed. Bit of a hot take maybe, but I'm not a huge fan of the whole overlay system. Yeah. I use it because, of course, I'm going to play the game in a way that I'm a min-maxer, so I'm going to play the game in a way that I can min-max the game, and it's going to involve that. But just because something makes a certain aspect of the game easier to play doesn't mean I think it's better. Another example of this I've said in the past is I think the game allows us to move too quickly in Path of Exile. Yes, everybody loves moving really fast. Everybody loves getting stronger. I like going through the process of starting slow and getting faster. I like trying to get as fast as the game will let me, but I don't necessarily want to be absolutely blitzing through the map at a speed that is almost uncontrollable. For example, 1 year ago, Headhunter, before Arch Nemesis. I think literally Arch Nemesis League, Headhunter. It was pretty stupid. So, yeah. It's funny for a couple of maps, but it's actually not that enjoyable to grind maps like that all day if you're running that fast. In other words, I appreciate Diablo 4 a little bit in its more grounded, realistic movement speed approach. But you know, I definitely like Path of Exile, obviously, more. I mean, I like it a lot more overall. And I do like there being kind of a low floor and a high ceiling on movement speed. I like the increasing the speed, increasing the power. But the ceiling shouldn't be at the moon, is all I'm saying.
Results in a lot of backtracking. And yeah, it becomes second nature after a while to flash the map every 2 seconds, but just because I'm used to it doesn't make it good design. And I found myself asking, yet again, why don't I just go play Path of Exile? Most of these issues have already been ironed out in that game, and it's free! Another thing I just have to talk about is hardcore. I used to play hardcore in Path of Exile, and I wasn't amazing at it, okay? I was mediocre at best, but I did have fun. I could get characters into endgame with decent consistency and maybe not do the crazy bosses or anything like that, but I was able to really engage with that system, and I found it to be pretty enjoyable. Not perfect, mind you, but it was enjoyable. Diablo 4 Hardcore is trivialized completely. The existence of an elixir that cheats death, in combination with how it can be used and a few other mechanics in play here that I don't really need to discuss, that's just tedious, make hardcore basically a joke. Hardcore is supposed to be precisely that. No safety nets, no second.
This is kind of a new take people are having a little bit. I know people were very much on board, at least as far as I understand, people are very much on board with the idea that if the game detects you disconnect and you have the elixir on you or something, that you'll automatically pour it out. Of course, I mean, I kind of like that. Of course, I think log out macros are really bad. Again, talk about definitely not a best case scenario system. I don't personally play hardcore, but I died a lot in Diablo 3 in hardcore, and I had really bad internet at the time, and I had so many deaths that suffered through it. Even in my situation, do I wish there was some kind of better system for it back then? Yeah. I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think, though. If you like the elixir, or if you at least like the elixir for, like, if you disconnect. Yeah, curious about that. Or if you just think there shouldn't be any forgiveness at all.
Chances. For anyone who wants a challenge of that type, why would you play Diablo 4 where you can basically have a perpetual second chance in hardcore when Path of Exile exists, where hardcore is legitimately tense? And you don't get a constant second chance, which basically invalidates the concept of permadeath by existing. I don't know. Maybe some people disagree with that, and I'm not really going to die on that.
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised that he's bringing hardcore, like, talking about this even in the system. Like, this is, if anything, one reason not to play Path of Exile. Diablo, or Path of Exile hardcore is, you don't want to suggest to Diablo 4 fanboys that, hey, you should go play Path of Exile. It's a better game. And let's talk about hardcore and the differences there. Probably wouldn't talk about that. The Path of Exile hardcore is super punishing and really not recommended for just about anyone. Especially anyone remotely casual. In my opinion, overall, probably for at least it's a personal choice. But for me, I think I would be much more interested in playing Diablo 4 hardcore than I would be Path of Exile hardcore.
That hill per se.
Path of
but
one
I just
shots.
don't
That's
see
right.
the logic. Endgame is there, but there's not a ton of it. A lot of the endgame feels rather pointless, and just to be sure, I've been chatting with some friends of mine who are much, much more dedicated to grinding the game than I am, who have all basically confirmed my thinking is correct, and they've maxed out multiple characters, etc., etc. So I'm not really qualified to speak on this, so I talk to them, and they are, and the game just gets boring after a while. That's the general consensus. This, to me, isn't as concerning as certain other things that I've already talked about. They will add more content over time. I'm not actually, like, broken up over that. Seasons will be a thing. But I just have to keep saying this. Why would you pay $70 for something that has broken and shallow components of its core gameplay loop when a completely free alternative called Path of Exile exists right now? There are a lot of recycled bosses. Map progression isn't shared across characters, which deflated me completely when I went to make my druid. I actually stepped away from the game for a bit when that happened because I was so annoyed about it. And this one took me a bit to understand, but once I figured it out, I had this aha moment, if you will. Because the way dynamic level scaling works, you actually hurt yourself if you don't level properly. That may
Just real quick, I guess he's walking away from the topic here, but he's pushed this like more than once or twice now about the price tag. Like he's really pushing that. I guess that's a valid concern. I know a lot of people talked about it in my community. They didn't like the price tag of having to pay up front. I don't know. Maybe I'm old school. I'm used to having to pay a hefty price up front for games. Path of Exile was the first free to play game I ever played, I think. I mean, I don't play any games on phones, so I don't download games on phones. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, honestly, maybe Path of Exile is the one and only free to play game I've ever played. So it's not really in my blood to judge a game based on the price tag up front. Like to me, all games cost a hefty price tag up front, and Path of Exile is the major exception. But I guess I'm a boomer. Like that's not the way it is anymore. Things have flipped over, I suppose. So that argument doesn't really work on me at all. But I guess it does work on a lot of people, though.
sound stupid, but let me explain.
PoE gets you in MTX. Well, I actually don't care really at all about MTX. So, um, yeah. In fact, my main of course, I bought Stash Tabs. I did buy a few MTX in Path of Exile, but I bought it honestly. My motivation for buying the MTX was more to support the company, knowing that I didn't even pay money up front for the game, than it was. Ooh, look at this right cool MTX. Look how cool I look. It was like 80-20 or something. It was like 80% of the motivation was to support the company. 20% of the motivation maybe was to look cool. So I don't know where you guys sit on that ratio when you buy MTX or whatever, but that's kind of where I was.
Every time you level, monsters level with you. Going out and grinding a few levels on something that seems fairly easy at the time in order to get stronger for other content isn't really a thing, because you need to be slotting every point you get into tangible immediate bonuses, or else leveling actively hurts the power fantasy. I'm not kidding. It may be subtle at times, and I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding some of this or I had a bad experience, right? But level scaling, leveling up actively hurts the power fantasy unless you put the points in the right places every time immediately with upgrades to gear alongside as you go. Now, sure, that may be fine for some people because
Unless you put the points in the right place. Yeah, that is an interesting point on there. I was going to refute a little bit, but that is a good point. When I played Diablo 4, I already had guides open and knew exactly like what the best thing to do. Although I actually made my own build with a bleed build with steel grasp and stuff, so it was good. But as somebody who's very familiar with Diablo franchise, making builds and kind of going off my expertise in Diablo 3 Barbarian, noticing that the Barbarian was kind of the same in this game as it was in Diablo 3, I had a pretty good understanding how to make a good build, a high functioning build that wouldn't make me feel like I was getting weaker as I played, as long as I got reasonably lucky with upgrades as I went along. I personally didn't experience any issues with the scaling system in here. I didn't feel any backlash from, but I could definitely see where somebody is more casual, not using a guide, or not that familiar with the franchise, or not that familiar with the class archetype, or first time ever playing ARPG. I can see how the dynamic scaling system could backfire a bit on somebody who feel like they're leveling up and getting weaker, actually. Of course, it has to be said, major upsides for the dynamic scaling system, especially when it comes to multiplayer, whether it's in a group or out of a group and just running across people, and then not being restricted to play a certain zone at a certain time and never going back again because it's no longer relevant. Everything is relevant for the entire game, so that is nice. Some give and take. I've talked about this before. I think it's definitely one of the more interesting and risky decisions that the devs made in Diablo 4. I appreciate them making the decision. I know it's not going to go over well for some people, but I know it's going to go over very well for some other people. I'm right down the middle on it. I don't. As somebody who doesn't really play multiplayer, I don't know. It wasn't that bad for me.
they think that's the intended way to play. But I have this pattern personally where I like to grind something out for a while, get a bunch of loot, throw it in the stash, go sort it, check it out, sit in town, understand it all, figure out what's good, plug in upgrades, and then spend skill points. Nope, can't do that. When I try, I'm confronted by the fact that I don't have enough stash space to even do it. My character is weaker because I'm not doing enough constant incremental upgrades. Basically, I can't build outwards around a certain node, accomplishing a task over time the way that I want to, or I'll get weaker. And I have no search function, so the inventory portion of the game, even the skill tree portion of the game, is just tedious. Again, there's fun to be had for some players. I'm not going to dispute that. I'm just not really the one having that fun anymore. Learning the stats was fun. It genuinely was. I always enjoy that. But not everybody does, and it was fun until I discovered that vulnerability is a multiplicative damage type applied after other bonuses, thereby massively superior. It basically
So he discovered vulnerability was its own multiplier after he started playing the game. So as an example of, back in the open beta, I figured that out already. So I knew crit damage and vulnerability were their own separate multipliers. I didn't understand everything about everything with the multipliers, but those are the important pieces of information to know. And yeah, you can't really expect everybody to know that up front. Incidentally, they just nerfed vulnerability by like 40% across the board. So I guess I have to worry about it less or just feel less powerful or whatever. This video came out before that, so he didn't know.
basically any build that can't use vulnerability heavily is dead in the water. That was lucky for me because I happened to have used a couple different things that all heavily prioritized it on my first couple of characters. But man, my enthusiasm for the game was getting sapped really quickly after a certain point, and I can imagine that people that aren't as in tune with
Well, I see an interesting comment in the comments saying you don't really need a trade in a campaign for like the first half of the game. Yeah, I was talking about really wanting to trade. I'm somebody who actually likes trading the moment the game is out, basically. I like trading. Like, I have life searches set up to trade things as early as Act 2 in a Path of Exile release. Now, I know a lot of people, especially people who have proclivity to solo self-found, they think it's probably a stupid waste of time to trade for something, but I'll trade for things like, I don't know, Thief's Torment Ring or something like that, where, you get an item that would carry you over all the way into yellow or red maps. I think it's a good idea to actually, get your first chaos or two chaos that you find to actually trade for something in Act 2 or Act 3. You get massive power spike at that level, and it carries over a really long time. But of course, you don't want to be spending a whole lot of time alt tabbing when the League releases. But anyway, yeah. Or buy the first Dying Sun. Yeah, probably not. That's really expensive.
the stats kind of side of things are not really going to have a fun time when they realize how shallow this game actually is. ARPGs, for me at least, are about loot and unique character builds. I know that's not everyone, but I'm just talking about my subjective experience here. The loot gets repetitive fast in Diablo 4 and doesn't even really have in-depth customization. Why wouldn't I just play Path of Exile, where I can basically take a piece of shit white item from anywhere and slowly turn it into the greatest thing ever with the customization and crafting? Why would I play a $70 game where it's quite literally tedious to look at and sort through the loot?
Okay, I'm wondering if he's going to at least mention the fact that Diablo 4 just came out and Path of Exile. He's talking about take a white item, make it the best items ever been made. Dude, that's like 10 years of leagues and expansions on the game to make it turn a white item the best item ever. It certainly couldn't turn a white item into some insanely godly item in the first patch. But I know some people don't like people comparing, like, oh, Path of Exile Season 1 versus Diablo Season 4 Season 1. You can't compare. I mean, it's certainly not. I think we can all agree. You should refrain from making comparisons of Path of Exile currently in Diablo 4 currently as if they have had the same amount of development time on them.
And inventory. While I can't store it anywhere because there's no stash capacity, when a free alternative simply doesn't have those problems. The builds, they start off cool until they're not, and I'm sure one day I'll circle back to Diablo 4 and appreciate it when they iron out all the broken stuff, but for my playstyle, it just doesn't cut it for me. I could keep going about the different individual activities, or capstone dungeons, or renown, etc., and I'm sure the diehard fans will be upset that I haven't, because Helltide is super good, and yes, it is quite fun, or you're a scrub who doesn't understand.
Okay, I also agree. Helltides is probably the best thing they made. I made a separate video saying Helltide should have been Season 1's content. That would have actually made me interested in doing Season 1, not this almost nothing content season that they're doing right here.
And the genius. Yes, I'm probably a scrub compared to some or most of you, but At the end of the day, if I'm looking at this game from my own unique individual perspective, and if I were forced to give it a numerical rating, I'd give it a go play Path of Exile out of 10. There's legitimately no reason that I see to purchase this game right now. In the end, people can and will, of course,
Nice.
enjoy Diablo 4. It's not for me to ridicule or shame anyone or say anything about that. I'm not saying you can't think that this game is amazing. There's plenty of things here that are well made and fun to play, but this shit's not ready yet. It just isn't. You can like what you like, and I won't make fun of anyone for it, but making this video just cemented the feeling right now as I say this and read the script that I don't have a reason to log in to Diablo 4. And what I really want to do now is go spin up Path of Exile because it's a better game. End of review. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links down below. There's a whole bunch of different things down there, but I won't stress about it. Thanks for watching, and have a nice night.
Bit of a giraffe, really. Okay. Well, the video's done. Yeah, I think it's this take was all right. It was all right. There's no red flags about it. There's nothing that he said was completely wrong. I agree with the majority of what he said in here. Although, yeah, I mean, I think it could all be kind of boiled down to, Diablo 4, amazing polish. It's a very pretty looking game, right? And the surface level things are really great in Diablo 4. But when it comes to examining the depth of the game, of course, Path of Exile is going to take the cake easily on that. And a lot of that has to do with how much development time Path of Exile has had, to be fair. But even excluding that factor alone, definitely, if you're someone who is, like, if you're watching this video and you're someone who's actually, like, trying to get a better sense of which game to play moving forward, if you're just all about the surface level, casual, few hours here and there, I don't know, maybe D4 really is a better game for you. But if you care about depth, much depth at all, and if you care at all about an end game to a game, then Path of Exile is going to be a much better game, in my opinion. And that's without even knowing Path of Exile 2 yet, without experiencing that. But that is coming fairly soon, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. What do you guys think? Pretty good video, huh? Yeah, go ahead and check out the description. You can go to his video directly there. Give it a like. Give it some subscribe. Might have been kind of a big hit video for this guy. Very well-timed video for sure. I don't really think this video is designed for Path of Exile players who have played Diablo 4 to then re-examine or reaffirm their love for Path of Exile. But maybe it is a little bit there. A little bit of red meat for the base, I guess. But yeah, hopefully it's useful for some people who are... Because we're, as Path of Exile players, we actually do want people to play Diablo 4 to then, as a gateway drug, to then come over to Path of Exile, where they're going to find much more depth and things to do in there. Yeah, pretty good.